Inconsistency is silent failure. It destroys progress slowly. It weakens identity quietly. It replaces discipline with impulse. You do not lack talent. You lack stability. Success does not require intensity. It requires repetition. This audiobook is about one skill: consistency. Calm action. Repeated daily. Regardless of mood. Become consistent. Everything changes when you do. Mood changes constantly. Sleep affects it. Food affects it. Weather affects it. Conversations affect it. If your behavior follows mood, your progress will never stabilize. That is the problem. Most people act when they feel energized. They delay when they feel tired. They withdraw when they feel uncertain. They believe this is natural. It is common. It is not effective. That's the key. Mood cannot be the driver of disciplined action. You have a choice. You can continue reacting to how you feel. Or you can act according to what is required. Long-term progress demands stability. Stability does not come from emotion. Emotion fluctuates daily. Sometimes hourly. If you rely on it, you become inconsistent. Inconsistency weakens identity. Identity shapes behavior. When you repeatedly skip action because you do not feel like it, you reinforce avoidance. Avoidance becomes habit. Habit becomes identity. You begin to see yourself as someone who starts and stops. That perception shapes the future. This must stop. It's not about energy. It's about discipline. Energy is temporary. Discipline is structural. You do not wait to feel focused. You create focus through action. You do not wait to feel confident. You build confidence through repetition. You do not wait to feel calm. You regulate first. Most people think they must change how they feel before they change how they act. This is backwards. Action shapes feeling. Behavior influences mood more than mood influences behavior. When you sit down and begin, resistance decreases. When you move your body, lethargy fades. When you pause and breathe, tension lowers. You act first. Feeling follows. You don't need their permission to operate this way. You do not need approval to ignore emotional fluctuation. You are allowed to behave consistently even when your mood is unstable. This is not suppression. It is control. Suppression denies emotion. Control regulates it. When you feel low energy, you do not panic. You slow your breathing. You reduce unnecessary movement. You narrow focus to the next action. You act deliberately. Stillness before action reduces emotional noise. Noise amplifies mood. Quiet lowers intensity. That's the key. Regulation precedes execution. Most emotional decisions are impulsive. Impulse feels urgent. Urgency creates instability. Instability produces uneven results. Uneven results damage confidence. Damaged confidence increases hesitation. Hesitation reinforces mood-based behavior. The cycle repeats. You interrupt it. When you notice you do not feel like acting, you pause. You observe the sensation. You label it clearly. Fatigue. Boredom. Doubt. Naming reduces intensity. Then you act anyway. Not recklessly. Not aggressively. Steadily. Small movement is enough. Start the task. Write one sentence. Complete one repetition. Take one step. Momentum begins quietly. Momentum reduces resistance. Resistance weakens mood's influence. Over time, mood loses authority. Authority returns to you. You have a choice. Let mood dictate your day. Or let your standards define it. Standards do not fluctuate. If your rule is to begin at a fixed time, you begin. If your rule is to pause before responding, you pause. If your rule is to finish what you start, you finish. No emotional debate. Debate drains attention. Attention drained weakens discipline. Mood thrives in debate. Structure removes debate. When structure exists, behavior stabilizes. Stabilized behavior builds identity. Stable identity builds strength. Most people misunderstand discipline. They believe it requires feeling powerful. It does not. It requires acting without feeling powerful. It requires movement during resistance. It requires control during instability. It's not about motivation. It's about discipline. Motivation comes and goes. Discipline repeats. Repetition builds reliability. Reliability builds self-trust. Self-trust reduces anxiety. Anxiety often comes from unpredictability. If you do not know how you will act tomorrow, you feel unstable. When you act regardless of mood, you become predictable. Predictability builds calm. Calm strengthens execution. Execution reinforces discipline. Everything connects. You must also stop glorifying emotional intensity. Some days you will feel driven. Some days you will not. Neither state defines your identity. Your response defines it. When you feel energized, you do the work. When you feel tired, you still do the work. The pace may adjust. The commitment does not. Adjustment is strategic. Abandonment is emotional. Learn the difference. You do not need dramatic willpower. You need quiet enforcement. Daily. Consistent. Unemotional. This builds internal respect. When you know you act regardless of mood, you respect yourself more. Respect increases confidence. Confidence reduces internal conflict. Internal conflict drains energy. Energy preserved strengthens consistency. You have a choice. Stay reactive to how you feel. Or build a stable standard that overrides mood. One path creates fluctuation. The other creates progress. Consistency begins here. It begins when behavior stops depending on emotion. When you master this, your days become structured. Your effort becomes predictable. Your identity becomes stable. You stop asking how you feel. You start asking what is required. That shift changes everything. You learn that mood cannot guide long-term progress. Now you must define what replaces it. Emotion cannot lead. Standards must. If you remove mood from decision-making, something must replace it. That replacement is standards. Without standards, you drift. You wake up and decide based on feeling. You adjust based on comfort. You delay based on resistance. This creates instability. Instability weakens identity. That's the key. Consistency requires fixed internal rules. A standard is a decision made in advance. It is not negotiated daily. It is not adjusted based on mood. It holds. Most people rely on intention. They intend to work hard. They intend to stay calm. They intend to follow through. Intention without structure collapses under pressure. Pressure exposes weak foundations. If there is no rule, emotion wins. You have a choice. Operate from temporary intention. Or operate from defined standards. Standards remove debate. Debate drains attention. Attention drained weakens execution. Execution weakened creates doubt. Doubt increases hesitation. Hesitation reinforces inconsistency. You interrupt that cycle by defining rules. Simple ones. I begin at this time. I pause before responding. I finish before switching tasks. These are not suggestions. They are commitments. You don't need their permission to enforce them. You do not need approval to live by structure. Structure is not rigidity. It is stability. Most people fear standards because they fear restriction. They want flexibility. Flexibility without discipline becomes chaos. Chaos fragments focus. Fragmented focus produces uneven results. Uneven results damage confidence. Confidence weakened increases emotional fluctuation. Everything connects. Standards stabilize behavior across circumstances. Good day. You follow the standard. Bad day. You follow the standard. Stressful moment. You follow the standard. This repetition builds identity. Identity shapes automatic behavior. When behavior becomes automatic, effort decreases. Reduced effort increases sustainability. Sustainability defines real consistency. Most inconsistency comes from internal negotiation. You ask yourself if you feel ready. You ask if you should delay. You ask if this can wait. Each question opens space for mood to intervene. Standards close that space. The answer is already decided. You act. That's the key. Predecision eliminates emotional interference. When standards exist, you experience less friction. Friction drains energy. Energy preserved strengthens discipline. Stillness helps you enforce standards. When resistance appears, you pause. You breathe slowly. You reduce internal urgency. You remind yourself of the rule. Then you act according to it. Not because you feel like it. Because it is your standard. Most people try to adjust their feelings before acting. You act first. Feelings adjust later. This is control. Not suppression. Control means you choose timing. You do not let emotion dictate it. You have a choice. Allow shifting emotion to guide behavior. Or allow defined principle to guide behavior. One path leads to fluctuation. The other leads to stability. Standards must be clear. Vague rules fail. I will try harder is not a standard. I begin work at 6 is. I respond after pausing is. Clarity reduces interpretation. Interpretation creates loopholes. Loopholes invite inconsistency. Remove ambiguity. Enforce simplicity. Most people abandon standards when challenged. They relax rules under stress. They excuse behavior under fatigue. This trains weakness. If your standards move when conditions change, they are preferences. Preferences shift. Standards hold. You must decide which you are building. You do not need dramatic rules. You need enforceable ones. Few. Clear. Repeated daily. Repetition installs identity. Identity stabilizes action. Stable action builds strength. Strength reinforces consistency. Consistency compounds progress. Over time, something shifts. You stop feeling disciplined. You start being disciplined. Behavior becomes predictable. Predictability reduces anxiety. Anxiety often arises from uncertainty about yourself. When you trust your standard, uncertainty fades. You trust your response. Trust strengthens control. Control defines discipline. It's not about personality. It's about discipline. Personality shifts with environment. Discipline holds across environments. You do not adjust your values for convenience. You apply them consistently. This builds integrity. Integrity aligns intention and action. Alignment reduces internal conflict. Internal conflict drains energy. Energy preserved increases execution quality. Everything connects. When you operate from fixed standards, life simplifies. Fewer decisions. Less negotiation. Less emotional volatility. More steady action. More predictable outcomes. You have a choice. Live by impulse. Or live by rule. Impulse is reactive. Rule is deliberate. Deliberate action sustains progress. Progress reinforces identity. Identity stabilizes consistency. You removed mood as your guide. Now you have replaced it with standards. Next, you must protect the environment that supports those standards. Because even strong rules can weaken under constant distraction. Standards mean nothing if your attention is scattered. You can define rules. You can set schedules. You can commit to action. But if your mind is constantly interrupted, consistency breaks. That is the problem. Most people try to be disciplined in chaotic environments. They allow noise. They allow constant input. They allow interruption. Then they blame themselves for inconsistency. That's the key. Attention must be protected if behavior is to remain stable. Attention is limited. Every notification consumes it. Every unnecessary conversation drains it. Every random scroll fragments it. Fragmented attention weakens execution. Weak execution damages confidence. Damaged confidence increases emotional fluctuation. Everything connects. You have a choice. Let your attention be pulled. Or decide where it goes. Decision creates control. Control builds consistency. Most people begin their day reacting. Messages first. Updates first. Noise first. Reaction sets the tone. Tone influences behavior. If the tone is scattered, the day becomes scattered. You interrupt this pattern. You begin with intention. No input. No reaction. You start with your standard. Stillness before stimulation stabilizes the mind. Stability supports execution. Execution reinforces discipline. You do not need their permission to be unavailable. You do not owe instant access to your attention. Availability without boundaries invites instability. Boundaries protect focus. Focus strengthens identity. Identity sustains consistency. Guarding attention also means reducing voluntary distraction. Most distractions are chosen. You open the app. You check the feed. You switch tasks. You call it a break. It is fragmentation. Fragmentation erodes depth. Depth is required for consistent output. You must remove unnecessary input. Silence notifications. Close irrelevant tabs. Place the phone outside the room. These are structural decisions. Structure outlasts motivation. It's not about productivity. It's about discipline. Productivity fluctuates. Discipline enforces focus. When attention is protected, execution improves. Improved execution builds confidence. Confidence reduces emotional swings. Reduced swings stabilize behavior. Stillness is a strategic advantage here. When the urge to check something appears, you pause. You breathe. You observe the impulse. You do not obey immediately. Impulse weakens when ignored. Reaction strengthens it. That's the key. What you do not reinforce loses power. Most people believe they lack focus. Often they lack boundaries. Boundaries reduce interference. Reduced interference strengthens concentration. Concentration builds reliability. Reliability defines consistency. You have a choice. Allow constant interruption. Or create controlled engagement. Controlled engagement means you decide when to respond. Not when others demand it. You schedule communication. You schedule consumption. You schedule rest. Everything else is noise. Noise drains energy. Energy preserved supports discipline. Attention must also be guarded internally, not just externally. Thought patterns can distract as much as devices. Worry pulls focus. Comparison pulls focus. Rumination pulls focus. You notice these patterns. You do not indulge them. Indulgence strengthens distraction. Observation weakens it. You redirect calmly. No frustration. No self-criticism. Just correction. Correction builds control. Control stabilizes behavior. Most inconsistency begins with mental clutter. Clutter reduces clarity. Reduced clarity increases hesitation. Hesitation invites mood back into the decision. Mood disrupts consistency. Everything connects. When attention is clean, action becomes simple. You know what matters. You execute. You finish. You move forward. No unnecessary switching. No scattered energy. You also rest deliberately. Rest without input. No scrolling. No stimulation. True rest restores attention. Rested attention improves regulation. Improved regulation strengthens discipline. You don't need their permission to simplify your environment. You are allowed to remove what weakens you. Minimal input. Clear workspace. Defined focus blocks. These are not extreme measures. They are structural supports. Consistency requires support. Without support, standards collapse. With support, they hold. You have a choice. Live in constant reaction. Or build an environment that protects your focus. One path leads to instability. The other leads to steady execution. You removed mood as your guide. You built standards that do not move. Now you understand that attention must be defended daily. Next, you must apply that focused attention to one behavior that defines reliability. Completion. Switching feels productive. It is not. Most people move from task to task without finishing. They answer a message. Then check something else. Then begin another project. Then stop halfway. This creates motion. It does not create progress. That's the key. Consistency requires completion, not constant movement. When you switch before finishing, you fragment attention. Fragmented attention weakens depth. Weak depth produces shallow results. Shallow results reduce confidence. Reduced confidence increases hesitation. Hesitation invites mood back into the process. Everything connects. You have a choice. Continue switching impulsively, or finish before moving on. Finishing builds internal trust. Trust stabilizes identity. Stable identity supports consistent behavior. Most unfinished tasks remain open mentally. Even if you leave the room, they follow you. They consume attention silently. Open loops create tension. Tension reduces clarity. Reduced clarity weakens execution. You must close loops. One task. One direction. One completion. This does not mean perfection. It means defined endpoints. Before you begin, decide what done means. Clear definition prevents endless revision. Endless revision often hides avoidance. Avoidance looks like productivity. It is not. It is fear of finishing. Fear of evaluation. Fear of imperfection. You interrupt this pattern. You define completion. You reach it. You move forward. It's not about intensity. It's about discipline. Discipline stays with the task after novelty fades. Novelty disappears quickly. Effort remains. The middle is uncomfortable. That is where most people leave. Leaving trains inconsistency. Staying trains reliability. When the urge to switch appears, you pause. You regulate your breathing. You observe the impulse. You do not obey immediately. Impulse weakens when not reinforced. Reaction strengthens it. That's the key. Restraint builds control. Switching also destroys rhythm. Each new task requires cognitive reset. Reset consumes energy. Energy drained increases emotional volatility. Volatility weakens discipline. When you stay, rhythm develops. Rhythm reduces friction. Reduced friction supports consistency. You don't need their permission to ignore distractions. You are allowed to finish what you started, even if something else seems urgent. Most urgency is artificial. Real urgency is rare. Reaction to artificial urgency creates chaos. Chaos disrupts focus. Focus supports execution. Execution reinforces identity. Identity stabilizes consistency. You have a choice. Respond to every new input, or protect the integrity of your current task. Protection requires boundaries. No notifications during focus. No multitasking. No task stacking. These are structural decisions. Structure reduces decision fatigue. Reduced fatigue strengthens discipline. Most people believe multitasking increases efficiency. It increases fragmentation. Fragmentation lowers quality. Lower quality reduces satisfaction. Reduced satisfaction increases avoidance. Avoidance weakens consistency. Everything connects. Finishing also builds momentum. Completion creates psychological closure. Closure frees attention. Freed attention strengthens the next task. Without closure, attention remains divided. Divided attention weakens output. Output weakened increases doubt. Doubt feeds hesitation. Hesitation invites switching. The cycle continues. You break it by finishing. Not occasionally. Daily. Quietly. Consistently. Completion becomes your standard. When finishing becomes automatic, confidence increases. You stop fearing long tasks. You trust your ability to stay. Trust stabilizes effort. Stabilized effort compounds progress. Compound progress defines consistency. You have a choice. Live in constant transition. Or build a reputation with yourself for completion. Reputation with yourself matters most. When you know you finish, self-doubt decreases. Self-doubt often triggers switching. Eliminate the trigger. Enforce the rule. Finish before you switch. Stillness strengthens this habit. When boredom appears, you pause. When frustration rises, you regulate. When distraction tempts, you return. Return again. Return repeatedly. Repetition builds discipline. Discipline builds identity. Identity shapes automatic behavior. Over time, switching impulsively feels unnatural. Completion feels normal. Normal behavior defines who you are. Consistency is not dramatic. It is repetitive. One task. Completed fully. Repeated daily. You removed mood as your guide. You built standards. You protected attention. Now you understand that focus must be directed toward completion. Next, you must strengthen the smallest unit of consistency. Daily. Repetition. Consistency is not built in dramatic moments. It is built in small repetitions. Most people look for breakthroughs. They want sudden change. They want visible progress. They want fast transformation. That mindset destroys stability. That's the key. Consistency grows through small actions repeated daily. You have a choice. Chase intensity. Or master repetition. Intensity feels powerful. It fades quickly. Repetition feels ordinary. It compounds quietly. Most people overestimate what they can do in 1 week. They underestimate what they can do in 1 year. They start aggressively. They exhaust themselves. They stop. Stopping resets progress. Resetting weakens identity. Identity shapes long-term behavior. You interrupt this cycle. You lower the emotional volume. You focus on daily execution. Small tasks. Completed fully. Repeated tomorrow. It's not about ambition. It's about discipline. Ambition without structure creates bursts. Discipline with repetition creates permanence. Choose actions you can sustain. Not actions that impress. Impressing others is irrelevant. You don't need their permission to progress quietly. You are allowed to build slowly. Slow growth with consistency beats rapid growth with collapse. Most inconsistency comes from overcommitment. Too many goals. Too many changes. Too much pressure. Pressure without control increases emotional volatility. Volatility weakens discipline. Small repetition reduces pressure. Pressure reduced stabilizes behavior. Stable behavior strengthens identity. Identity builds confidence. Confidence supports repetition. Everything connects. Daily repetition must be defined clearly. Wake at the same time. Begin at the same time. Train at the same time. Write 1 page. Read 10 minutes. These actions seem small. They are not small. They are structural. Structure repeated becomes identity. Identity repeated becomes character. Character determines outcome. When resistance appears, you pause. You regulate your breathing. You observe the thought that says skip today. You do not obey it. Skipping once weakens the chain. Skipping repeatedly breaks it. Chains of repetition build momentum. Momentum reduces resistance. Resistance reduced strengthens consistency. That's the key. Momentum is created through repetition, not emotion. You must remove emotional negotiation. No debate about whether today matters. Today always matters. Each repetition strengthens identity. Each missed repetition weakens it. You do not need perfection. You need continuity. If you fail once, you return immediately. No delay. Delay increases avoidance. Immediate return reinforces discipline. Stillness supports repetition. When boredom appears, you remain steady. When monotony appears, you remain steady. When doubt appears, you remain steady. Monotony is part of consistency. Most people abandon repetition because it feels boring. They crave novelty. Novelty disrupts structure. Structure sustains progress. You have a choice. Seek stimulation. Or build stability. Stimulation excites. Stability strengthens. Strength compounds over time. Repetition also simplifies life. You stop reinventing your day. You stop chasing new systems. You follow what works. Predictability reduces stress. Reduced stress improves regulation. Improved regulation supports execution. Execution repeated builds consistency. Small actions also build trust. When you complete daily tasks consistently, you trust yourself more. Self-trust reduces hesitation. Reduced hesitation lowers emotional interference. Lower interference strengthens discipline. You stop questioning your ability. You act. Action reinforces identity. Identity stabilizes repetition. Everything connects. Do not underestimate small work. Do not dismiss minor progress. Compounding is invisible at first. Then it becomes undeniable. You have a choice. Overload yourself and burn out. Or build patiently and endure. Endurance wins. Patience builds resilience. Resilience sustains repetition. Repetition defines consistency. It's not about inspiration. It's about discipline. Inspiration comes and goes. Discipline repeats. Repeat tomorrow. Repeat next week. Repeat next month. This is how identity forms. Not through one dramatic effort. Through thousands of small actions. When repetition becomes natural, consistency feels effortless. Effort decreases. Reliability increases. Reliability builds strength. Strength reinforces discipline. You removed mood. You built standards. You protected attention. You finished tasks. Now you understand that daily repetition is the engine. Next, you must control one behavior that disrupts repetition more than any other. Immediate reaction. One uncontrolled reaction can undo days of steady work. Consistency is fragile in the presence of impulse. You build rhythm. You build structure. You build repetition. Then you react emotionally. Everything destabilizes. That's the key. Immediate reaction is the enemy of consistency. Most people respond before they regulate. A message arrives. They answer instantly. A comment irritates them. They escalate immediately. They call it honesty. It is impulsivity. Impulsivity fractures discipline. You have a choice. React instantly. Or regulate before responding. Regulation creates space. Space creates clarity. Clarity protects behavior. Most damage happens in seconds. Not hours. A sharp reply. A rushed decision. An emotional shift. Those seconds carry consequences. Regret drains focus. Drained focus weakens execution. Weak execution disrupts repetition. Everything connects. You interrupt this pattern with pause. Not a dramatic pause. A deliberate one. Slow your breathing. Relax your shoulders. Observe the internal tension. Do not speak yet. Do not decide yet. Just observe. Observation reduces intensity. Reaction increases it. That's the key. Emotion fades when not fed. Most people act at the peak of feeling. Peak intensity distorts judgment. Distorted judgment creates unstable results. Unstable results weaken confidence. Weakened confidence invites mood back into the process. You break that loop. You train stillness before response. Stillness is not avoidance. It is strategic delay. It lowers emotional volume. Lower volume improves precision. Precision builds trust. Trust strengthens consistency. You don't need their permission to pause. You do not owe anyone immediate expression. You are allowed to think before speaking. When you regulate first, your response carries weight. When you react first, your response carries volatility. Volatility disrupts discipline. Stability protects it. Most inconsistency is emotional, not logistical. You do not lose progress because of inability. You lose progress because of reactivity. Reactivity drains energy. Energy drained reduces repetition. Reduced repetition weakens identity. Identity weakened invites inconsistency. Everything connects. Regulation must become automatic. When irritation appears, you pause. When frustration rises, you breathe. When pressure increases, you slow down internally. You do not rush. Rushing is insecurity disguised as urgency. Urgency destabilizes behavior. Stable pacing reinforces control. It's not about expression. It's about discipline. Discipline chooses timing. Timing influences outcome. A calm response resolves faster than an emotional one. Resolution preserves energy. Preserved energy sustains repetition. Repetition builds consistency. You have a choice. Release tension through reaction. Or build strength through restraint. Restraint builds authority. Authority over yourself is foundational. When you know you can control reaction, confidence increases. Confidence stabilizes mood. Stable mood supports consistent action. You also regulate internal reaction. A mistake happens. You do not criticize yourself immediately. You pause. You correct calmly. Calm correction strengthens competence. Escalation weakens focus. Focus is required for repetition. Stillness strengthens focus. Practice micropauses daily. Before answering. Before deciding. Before switching tasks. These pauses compound. Compound regulation becomes default behavior. Default behavior defines identity. Identity sustains consistency. When you regulate before responding, you protect your standards. You protect your attention. You protect your repetition. You protect your identity. Everything stabilizes. Most people think consistency is about effort. It is about control. Control over reaction. Control over timing. Control over emotion. That's the key. Consistency survives when reaction is regulated. You removed mood as your guide. You built standards. You protected attention. You finished tasks. You mastered repetition. Now you understand that emotional restraint protects all of it. Next, you must confront a quieter threat. Boredom. Boredom is where consistency breaks. Not in crisis. Not in failure. In monotony. Repetition becomes predictable. Progress feels slow. Stimulation decreases. Most people leave here. That's the key. If you cannot endure boredom, you cannot become consistent. Boredom is not pain. It is lack of novelty. Lack of novelty creates restlessness. Restlessness seeks escape. Escape interrupts repetition. Interrupted repetition weakens identity. Identity shapes behavior. Everything connects. You have a choice. Escape monotony. Or remain steady inside it. Most people crave stimulation. They switch tasks. They check something. They look for excitement. They call it a break. It is avoidance. Avoidance trains instability. Instability destroys consistency. Boredom appears when the work becomes routine. Routine is necessary. Routine builds skill. Skill requires repetition. Repetition requires tolerance of monotony. If you abandon routine because it feels dull, you abandon progress. You must change your interpretation. Boredom is not a signal to stop. It is a signal that structure is working. When work feels dramatic, it is new. When it feels ordinary, it is becoming stable. Stability is the objective. Not stimulation. It's not about excitement. It's about discipline. Discipline continues when emotion is neutral. Most inconsistency is emotional reaction to monotony. I need something different. This feels pointless. This is repetitive. Yes. It is repetitive. That is the point. You don't need their permission to stay focused on ordinary tasks. You are allowed to repeat without applause. You are allowed to build quietly. Boredom is a test of attention. When the mind seeks stimulation, you pause. You regulate your breathing. You observe the urge to escape. You do not obey it immediately. Impulse weakens when ignored. Reaction strengthens it. That's the key. What you refuse to reinforce loses influence. Most people mistake boredom for lack of progress. Progress is often invisible daily. Visible change appears later. If you require visible change to stay engaged, you will not last. Longevity requires neutrality. You act even when you feel nothing. No excitement. No resistance. Just steady execution. This builds identity. Identity builds resilience. Resilience sustains repetition. Repetition defines consistency. You have a choice. Chase novelty. Or build mastery. Novelty feels stimulating. Mastery feels repetitive. Mastery produces results. Results reinforce discipline. Discipline strengthens identity. When boredom appears, narrow your focus. One task. One action. Complete it fully. Do not seek stimulation. Seek precision. Precision increases engagement. Engagement reduces boredom. Boredom decreases when attention deepens. Shallow focus amplifies restlessness. Deep focus quiets it. Stillness is strategic here. When the urge to switch appears, pause. Slow your breathing. Return to the task. Returning repeatedly trains endurance. Endurance builds capacity. Capacity strengthens consistency. Most people abandon progress in the middle. Not because they cannot perform. Because they cannot tolerate monotony. Monotony is part of growth. Growth is not dramatic. It is incremental. Small actions repeated daily. Without applause. Without excitement. Without visible reward. You must accept this. You must normalize it. Consistency is not glamorous. It is structured repetition. Daily. Calm. Controlled. You do not need external validation. You need internal alignment. When alignment exists, boredom loses power. You act because it is your standard. Not because it is entertaining. That shift changes everything. Boredom becomes neutral. Neutrality stabilizes behavior. Stable behavior compounds progress. Progress builds confidence. Confidence reduces emotional volatility. Reduced volatility strengthens discipline. Everything connects. You have a choice. Let monotony push you off course. Or let it strengthen your endurance. Endurance wins over time. Time magnifies consistency. Consistency builds identity. Identity defines outcome. You removed mood as your guide. You built standards. You protected attention. You finished tasks. You mastered repetition. You regulated reaction. Now you understand that boredom must be endured calmly. Next, you must eliminate the internal debate that undermines discipline. Emotional negotiation destroys consistency. It happens quietly. You know what you should do. You feel resistance. You start debating. Maybe later. Just this once. I deserve a break. The debate feels harmless. It is not. That's the key. Every negotiation weakens your standard. Most inconsistency is not lack of ability. It is internal argument. You argue with your own rules. You lower them. You justify the exception. Exceptions become patterns. Patterns become identity. Identity shapes behavior. Everything connects. You have a choice. Continue negotiating with emotion. Or remove the negotiation entirely. Negotiation drains attention. Attention drained weakens execution. Execution weakened reduces confidence. Reduced confidence invites more negotiation. The cycle strengthens. You break it by pre-deciding. If the rule is to begin at 6, you begin at 6. No internal meeting. No emotional vote. Just action. You don't need their permission to enforce your own rules. You do not need approval to stay aligned. Alignment is internal. Most people think discipline requires constant motivation. It requires clarity. Clarity eliminates debate. When the rule is clear, the answer is obvious. Debate only exists when standards are flexible. Flexible standards collapse under pressure. Pressure amplifies emotion. Emotion fuels negotiation. Negotiation weakens discipline. Stillness is your advantage here. When resistance appears, you pause. You breathe slowly. You observe the argument forming. You do not engage with it. Engagement strengthens it. Observation weakens it. That's the key. What you refuse to entertain loses power. Most internal negotiation sounds reasonable. It feels logical. It presents comfort as reward. But comfort now often creates instability later. You must recognize this pattern. When the mind suggests delay, you act. When the mind suggests avoidance, you continue. Not recklessly. Deliberately. It's not about force. It's about discipline. Discipline does not argue with emotion. It follows structure. Structure protects identity. Identity sustains consistency. You also eliminate negotiation about mood. You do not ask if you feel ready. You ask what is required. If action is required, you act. If rest is scheduled, you rest. No emotional override. Override creates instability. Stability requires predictability. Predictability builds trust. Trust reduces anxiety. Anxiety fuels negotiation. Everything connects. Most people negotiate because they fear discomfort. They soften the rule to avoid tension. Tension is temporary. Broken standards are lasting. You have a choice. Choose temporary discomfort. Or choose long-term instability. Temporary discomfort builds strength. Instability erodes it. Remove phrases like "just this once." That phrase is rarely true. One exception becomes two. Two become habit. Habit becomes identity. Identity defines outcome. When you remove negotiation, something changes. Decisions become faster. Energy is preserved. Focus sharpens. Execution improves. Improved execution reinforces discipline. Discipline becomes easier. Not because it requires less effort. Because it requires fewer debates. Fewer debates mean less emotional interference. Less interference strengthens consistency. You must also remove negotiation with distraction. If you committed to focus, you focus. You do not partially focus. You do not multitask. You complete. Completion reinforces identity. Identity strengthens repetition. Repetition defines consistency. You have a choice. Keep arguing with your own standards. Or enforce them without discussion. Enforcement builds authority. Authority over yourself builds confidence. Confidence stabilizes mood. Stable mood supports discipline. That's the key. Consistency survives when negotiation ends. You removed mood as your guide. You built standards. You protected attention. You finished tasks. You mastered repetition. You regulated reaction. You endured boredom. Now you have eliminated internal debate. Next, you must solidify everything into structure. Because discipline cannot rely on daily effort alone. Effort is unreliable. Some days you have energy. Some days you do not. Some days you feel focused. Some days you feel scattered. If your consistency depends on daily effort, it will collapse. That's the key. Discipline must become automatic. Most people rely on willpower. They push harder. They promise to try again. They depend on intensity. Intensity fades. Structure remains. You have a choice. Fight yourself every day. Or build systems that remove the fight. Automation begins with predecision. You decide once. Then you repeat without debate. Work begins at a fixed time. Training happens on fixed days. Devices are removed during focus blocks. You do not ask how you feel. You follow the structure. It's not about motivation. It's about discipline. Discipline becomes sustainable when it stops relying on emotion. Emotion fluctuates. Systems do not. Most inconsistency happens in small decisions. Should I start now? Should I delay? Should I check something first? Each decision drains energy. When energy drops, resistance rises. When resistance rises, negotiation returns. Negotiation breaks consistency. Automation removes the decision. There is no question. There is only execution. You don't need their permission to simplify your routine. You are allowed to reduce flexibility. Flexibility without boundaries invites instability. Instability weakens identity. Identity sustains consistency. Environment must support automation. If distraction is within reach, you will use it. Remove it. Prepare your workspace before starting. Lay out what you need. Reduce friction. Lower friction increases compliance. Compliance builds repetition. Repetition builds identity. Identity stabilizes discipline. Automation also applies to reaction. When irritation appears, you pause automatically. When pressure rises, you regulate automatically. When distraction tempts, you return automatically. Same response. Every time. Predictable behavior strengthens authority. Authority over yourself builds confidence. Confidence reduces emotional volatility. Volatility disrupts consistency. Everything connects. Most people resist structure because they confuse it with restriction. Structure creates freedom. When behavior is predictable, you stop battling yourself. Less internal conflict. Less wasted energy. More steady execution. Execution repeated daily builds strength. You have a choice. Rely on fluctuating effort. Or install reliable systems. Reliable systems carry you when energy is low. They carry you when mood dips. They carry you when pressure rises. You do not rise to your intention under stress. You fall to your habits. If habits are automated, you remain steady. If habits are weak, you collapse. Build habits deliberately. Wake at the same time. Begin at the same time. Pause before reacting. Finish before switching. Simple rules. Repeated daily. This builds baseline reliability. Baseline reliability defines consistency. You stop chasing peak performance. You build stable performance. Stable performance compounds. Compounding creates visible results. Visible results reinforce. Discipline. Reinforced discipline strengthens identity. When discipline becomes automatic, effort decreases. Not because work is easy. Because resistance is lower. Lower resistance reduces friction. Reduced friction increases sustainability. Sustainability defines long-term success. You do not need dramatic self-control. You need structured repetition. Daily. Quiet. Predictable. You have a choice. Continue starting over every week. Or build a system that does not reset. Resetting weakens confidence. Sustaining builds it. Confidence stabilizes behavior. Stable behavior defines consistency. That's the key. Consistency survives when discipline runs automatically. You removed mood. You built standards. You protected attention. You finished tasks. You mastered repetition. You regulated reaction. You endured boredom. You removed negotiation. Now you have installed structure. One final step remains. Discipline must stop feeling like something you manage. It must become who you are. At first, consistency feels forced. You remind yourself. You correct yourself. You push yourself. It feels deliberate. Over time, it must feel natural. That is the final shift. That's the key. Consistency must become identity. Most people try to act consistent. They perform it in controlled environments. They maintain discipline when it is convenient. Under pressure, they revert. Reversion exposes instability. Instability weakens identity. Identity must be stable. You have a choice. Continue trying to be consistent. Or become consistent. Trying requires constant effort. Becoming requires repetition. Repetition reshapes identity. Identity reshapes behavior. When identity is aligned, action becomes automatic. You stop asking if you feel ready. You stop negotiating standards. You stop seeking stimulation. You operate. Operating is calm. Operating is predictable. Predictability builds authority. Authority over yourself defines strength. Most inconsistency comes from fragmentation. Disciplined at work. Careless at home. Focused for a week. Unstructured the next. Fragmentation weakens character. Character must be whole. You do not switch identities depending on context. You maintain alignment. Private behavior matches public behavior. Internal dialogue matches external standards. No contradiction. Contradiction drains energy. Energy drained reduces focus. Reduced focus weakens discipline. Everything connects. You don't need their permission to live by your standard consistently. You are allowed to remain steady when others fluctuate. Consistency may appear rigid to unstable people. It is not rigidity. It is reliability. Reliability builds trust. Trust reduces anxiety. Anxiety often comes from unpredictability in yourself. When you know how you will act tomorrow, anxiety decreases. You trust your system. You trust your response. Trust stabilizes emotion. Stable emotion supports discipline. Living from consistent identity means you no longer chase motivation. You no longer wait for mood. You no longer depend on external pressure. You act because it aligns with who you are. When challenges appear, you do not panic. You regulate. You follow your standard. You continue. Pressure reveals identity. If identity is unstable, pressure breaks it. If identity is disciplined, pressure strengthens it. You have a choice. Adapt your standards to comfort. Or adapt comfort to your standards. Comfort should not define you. Principle should. It's not about intensity. It's about discipline. Discipline repeated becomes character. Character repeated becomes destiny. When consistency becomes identity, excuses lose power. You stop explaining inconsistency. You stop rationalizing delay. You correct quietly. Correction becomes routine. Routine becomes baseline. Baseline defines your life. Most people live in cycles. Strong for a month. Weak the next. Motivated for a season. Scattered afterward. You break the cycle. You stabilize. You operate at a steady level. Not extreme. Not dramatic. Steady. Steady progress compounds. Compound progress builds confidence. Confidence reduces volatility. Reduced volatility strengthens discipline. Everything aligns. Consistency also simplifies decisions. When identity is clear, choices are easier. You do not debate who you are. You act accordingly. Clarity reduces hesitation. Hesitation invites mood back into the process. Mood disrupts stability. Stability sustains growth. You wake up and execute. You encounter pressure and regulate. You feel boredom and continue. You feel resistance and remain steady. Not because you are forcing yourself. Because this is how you operate. That is identity. You have a choice. Live as someone who occasionally performs discipline. Or live as someone who embodies it. Performance fades. Identity persists. When consistency becomes identity, progress becomes predictable. Predictable progress builds strength. Strength reinforces discipline. Discipline stabilizes identity. The cycle completes. You removed mood as your guide. You built standards. You protected attention. You finished before switching. You mastered repetition. You regulated reaction. You endured boredom. You eliminated negotiation. You built automation. Now you embody consistency. No announcement. No performance. Just steady action. Become consistent. And remain that way. Consistency is not dramatic. It is quiet enforcement. Daily. Measured. Unemotional. You do not wait for energy. You act. You do not wait for clarity. You follow your standard. You do not react impulsively. You regulate first. Progress does not come from intensity. It comes from repetition. From this point forward, remove instability. Define your standards. Guard your attention. Finish what you begin. Repeat tomorrow. Become consistent. And stay that way.